Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost, and this is our Friday community gathering. It's the 144th consecutive week that we've been doing this since April 17th, 2020. Today, we're doing something a little special. We have a program, a producer development program, a producer training program. It consists of foundations, a basics course, and also a more advanced course called Masterclass. And I have the people that are teaching the class this coming semester coming on today to talk about the class itself and also about producing in general. I think it'll be of interest to a lot of people out there. And so I'm just going to bring them on right now, and we're going to start this conversation. So hello, Dave Elliott and Martin Platt, and hello, Blair Russell. Welcome to TRU. Welcome to the community gathering. I can't welcome you to TRU. You are already part of TRU. You are TRU. So thanks for stopping in. Blair is going to be teaching the foundations class going forward. So everybody in the room, please mute yourself. Okay. So Blair's going to be teaching the foundations course going forward, and Martin and Dave actually helped in the formation of PDMP. PDMP. It stands for Producer Development and Mentorship Program. It's a complicated name because I've been pulled in two different directions when we created this whole program. On one hand, we saw it as a development program for producers, but mentorship became a very important part, and we wanted to actually have a name that bragged a little bit about the fact that you do get mentorship. There is a certain amount of mentorship that is possible in the program from the people that teach it, and also from the guests that come in. And there's also the possibility in some instances of us creating mentorships. Oh, I know what it is. There it is. I found the one person that hadn't muted themselves, and I muted them. So we I just gotta say something. Pull me out of this, guys. Say hi.
I always thought that PDMP meant Producer Development Martin Platt. So now I'm very confused.
Yes, it was originally named after Martin Platt. Yes, it was. So anyway, we call it PDMP because nobody can remember Producer Development and Mentorship Program except for me. So the program is created. It's been a long time. I can't even remember how long ago it is. It's at least like 12 or 15 years. And it started because we had we do a play reading series, and we have readers who read these shows, and sometimes we have them come on the selection committee, and somebody came onto the selection committee and was in love with one of the musicals that he read, and his name was Van Deen. And Van Deen wanted to produce this musical called Saint Heaven, but he didn't feel comfortable. He didn't know that he had enough experience doing it. So one of my board members, Cheryl Weisenfeld, suggested that maybe she could mentor him. And so with Cheryl and I thinking about this, we decided to create a whole program that allowed for the possibilities of mentorships. And the mentorships are brutally difficult, by the way, just so everybody knows. I can't promise mentorships. They're very hard to navigate, to make happen. But what we could do is we could train people about the basics of producing. And I thought that was in and of itself a worthy goal of the program. So flash forward, I don't know how many years. When guys, do you remember when Martin and Dave, do you remember when you taught?
2017, I think.
So when they were teaching it,
I think that's right.
Well, you were there for more than 1 year, as I recall.
Yeah, that's true.
At that point we had one class. It was just one program, right? You weren't teaching one of two programs. We didn't have a master class at that time, did we? I don't think we did. We had everybody in one room, and people were at all different levels. And I like that because I think that there's something to be gleaned from people at higher levels and lower levels, sort of meeting and learning from each other and helping each other. But it also became apparent that a lot of people who went through foundations wanted something more advanced. And so Patrick Blake is with us today, and Michael Alden and Patricia Klausner, who were teaching the one class, convinced me. And Patrick will tell you that it was not an easy convince. He convinced me that we should do 2 programs, and one of the second program should be for masterclass. So we started doing
Pat
that.
Blake's always full of good ideas.
He's always full of good ideas that make for a lot of work, but we're happy to do it. So now that's the structure. We have a foundations class taught by Blair, and we have a master class taught by Martin and Dave. Now, Blair, do you want to tell people a little bit about the differences between the 2 classes as you understand it, and what you're doing and what you hope to do this coming semester?
Sure. I have never taken the master class, so I'm going to be making it up what the difference is, but I can talk about what.
And I'm here to say, I'm going to say, nah, not quite, but yeah, close.
This is, if I had to do a headline on the difference to kind of help people think about which one they should be applying for, although I don't think, just because, well, we'll talk about that later. There are folks who are very early in their process. Either they're interested in becoming a producer and they want to know the basics. They are an artist who is becoming a self-producer, or they're currently a self-producing artist, even if it's against their will. Or you have a project and you're in very, very early days. I think those 3 categories of people are definitely well suited for foundations. There are some folks who have projects that are a little further along, or they're gearing up towards something, they're kind of ready to get rolling, and they might be better suited to masterclass, but that's not always true, because sometimes talking about doing things against your will, sometimes it feels like a project is going and you feel like you need to start taking steps towards getting it produced. But if you're doing that and you don't feel like you have a solid foundation, then, well, it's called foundations. The foundations class can give you a great sort of base, even if you are in process with your project. So I know people who have done both classes, being in both positions, but really in foundations, my job is to give, as much as I can, a baseline understanding of what the job and responsibility is of a producer, and then try to give some insight into, best practices, at least in my opinion, for modern producers. So in my course, I'll be talking generally, and there's certainly time for individual questions about your specific project. I'm happy to meet people outside of class time for short sessions just to chat, but I'm going to be talking generally and kind of doing an overview for everyone, covering everything from producing at the smallest level, like what it's like to produce at a festival, to working with nonprofits, to producing commercially, to going to Broadway, to doing tours, and just trying to give an overview of what it means to be a producer in the modern industry. So we won't really have the time in class to get into every single person's individual needs, but it still can be super valuable, even if you feel like you're further along. So is that accurate?
That is all accurate. Just to give you everybody an idea, Blair just taught a class that started out with 25 but ended up with 21, which actually is very good rate, because people drop out of things all the time. We had 21 in the class. Master class is usually limited, and I haven't talked to Dave and Martin about this, but it's usually limited to 10 people, or it has been traditionally, and I don't know whether that's their plan or not. Dave or Martin, you want to jump in and just give a little contrast to what masterclass is? Masterclass, you definitely have to have a project. Basically, masterclass is going to focus on your project. PDM, the foundations class with Blair, we put people into teams to work on projects, hypothetical projects. This past term, Blair was he was brilliant at getting 4 people that actually had active projects that were happening, and he was able to put together teams with those producers. So they got to meet the producer and talk a little bit about the piece, and then they also got to meet with the producer after they did their presentation, I think on Tuesday, didn't they? Yeah, Tuesday. So Martin and Dave.
I mean, I think the difference in masterclass, and I think one of the things about 10 as a number is with people with projects who are going to be doing initial reports and then full presentations on their project later. It's a good number to not have the presentations take 2.5 hours and to really be able to focus on people and discuss. And in masterclass, we focus on doing full productions of shows, whether that's a Broadway production or a major off-Broadway production. We deal with touring, developmental productions, all the different paths, and we'll have guests in who are other general managers besides us, and lawyers, other producers, advertising, marketing, digital people, tour bookers. So we'll get some input from people who you'd be interfacing with on productions if you're doing a big off-Broadway show or a Broadway show. I think, Dave, it's fair to say it's mostly things that will make people's head explode. Is that what we're doing?
Well, I think also we'll just, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as Bob said, Martin and I taught the PDMP class, I think twice, which is what Blair is doing now. And I think one of the things that'll make this class more meaningful, well, depending on who's bringing what to what, but if you're looking at a specific project, and everything you're going to be talking about is going to be applied through your own specific project. And I think Martin and I, having done this a few times, as I'm sure a lot of the people that will be in this masterclass may well have been have seen projects from page to stage and been produced as well. It's so much more productive and informative if you have a specific project that you're actually doing, where you can apply all of this to that specific project, which is what makes this, I think, very meaningful, and potentially stuff you will take into your next production meeting.
And actually, looking at the people in the room, I just made quick notes that I'm general managing 2 off-Broadway shows for people in this room and 1 Broadway show for someone in this room. So I'm being haunted.
Yes, there's a lot of familiar faces on this board. So yeah, a lot of seasoned producers in the room. So which is great, which is a testament to you, Bob. Well done.
Oh, well, I didn't do anything. Okay, thank you. I'll take it. Sure. So there are a lot of specifics about the program that we can go into, or we can also start taking questions. If people have questions as we're going along, please let us know. Owen, are you going to be looking for questions?
Yep, I'm on the hunt. I've not seen any yet.
Bob, do you want me to do like a quick, more logistical overview for people, like a minute or so?
Sure.
So the
foundation
class meets on Tuesdays. It is 2 hours typically. That's 6:30 p.m. Eastern time to 8:30. The first half hour is normally what I call our happy half hour. It's a time for us to connect, to network, to, if I'm sort of open, if you want to ask questions. We typically do the lessons, as we can call them, for an hour and a half, and then after 8:30, we're supposed to be done at 8:30. But as anybody who's done my class knows, I'm very talkative, and luckily the last group was also very talkative, so sometimes we sort of kept going. But the only time you're absolutely required to be is from 7 to 8:30. It will be 10 classes that will start March 14th and go until June 13th, so right after the Tony Awards. And those classes will cover a range of basic topics, from choosing a project and strategy, general management, budgets, marketing, legal, raising money. In some of the classes, there will be guests. We'll probably have guests for the general manager class. Maybe Dave and Martin will do it. Maybe. We'll have guests for the marketing class, and we'll get some, marketing and press and publicity, and we'll find somebody from that area. And then there is a group project at the end, and I know group projects sound very scary, but this one is not. The group project, I will invite a number of producers, depending on how many people there are in the class and how many teams we need. A number of producers will come, active working producers will come with a show that they are interested in, or show that's really in early phases of development. And what you will do in a group is you will put together a pitch deck, just as you would if you were a producer pitching a show. And you will pitch that show, your strategy and your plan for the show, back to that producer. and that will happen but the last 4 classes, over the last 4 classes. So you'll have lots of time as a group to meet and take care of it. It shouldn't be too taxing. I think the last groups, and there's some people here who could speak to it, kind of enjoyed it. But yeah, so that's kind of the basic overview. So March 14th will be the first class. It's always Tuesdays. It's not every Tuesday, and once we'll publish that schedule because there are holidays and people are busy and things. But yeah, 6:30 to 8:30 at Tuesdays.
And the thing that those of you who are thinking about this might be interested in knowing is that some of the earlier sections that Blair teaches are about choosing a project, and we talk about the development. We basically run through everything that you need to know, from the very early development to budgeting for commercial productions. It's all there. The difference is there's probably a little bit more detail about the budgeting and the in masterclass, and there's probably a little bit more focus on your specific. Well, there is more focus on your specific project. In Blair's class, you're just going to get an overview of a lot of information. The thing that is really useful, a lot of us produce and a lot of us do stuff. When you have it organized into this class, this class, this class, this, 10 classes of where you actually are taking the ball of thread, and you're just pulling out the strands and looking at them. It actually really helps to understand the overview that you think that you kind of understand already, but it's like, oh yeah, there's that. We look at that and we do that. That's a question I'm actually going to ask the 3 of you when we finish talking about the class. I want to talk about what makes a good producer. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Giving you a little warning on that. So the class, the costs, when does it begin? That was answered. Where can we sign up for the PDMP everyone keeps referring to? I hide it. I make it very hard. No, basically, we have a website, and it's TRU online, truonline.org / small p small d Paul. It's PDMP, all small. There's all lowercase, and there's an application on there. And this you'll fill out the application, send it to us. Blair will review the foundations applications. Martin and Dave will review the masterclass applications, which also goes to another thing that we need to address, which is the fact that there is limited space in the masterclass. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply for it. If you think you might be interested in masterclass, request the masterclass. You have to email me for the masterclass application. I don't put it online. But that will give you basically the masterclass application and the basic PDMP foundations application. And we can sort of examine them. Blair, Martin, and Dave will look over the applications, and they'll come to some ideas about whether you would be best suited for the masterclass or might do better in foundations. We will think that through for you if you have any questions about it. The pricing for foundations is $295, and that's for 10 classes. A masterclass is $425, and that's for 8 or 9 classes. I'm not sure if it's 9 classes. So that's
our
all.
Classes are half an hour longer.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yes.
that's it. Well, there's a lot.
Although I like Blair's idea about what do you call it? You call it first fun happy hour?
Happy half hour.
Half hour.
Happy half hour.
half hour.
Happy half hour. I like happy half hour happy hour. Okay, we'll figure that out.
With cocktails.
Maybe it is Zoom,
Zoom.
Well, we can't do cocktails because it's before class, and then nobody.
Exactly, that's
anything
true.
I said, which
That's
honestly,
true.
I talk a lot, so that might be for the best.
No, people love you, Blair. You have no idea. I get all these wonderful rave comments. People just so enjoyed taking your class. You're very inspiring. You call yourself demanding. Nobody's ever said to me, "Man, he's so demanding." You inspire them. So I want to say this to the room. There are a lot of producers in this business, and a lot of them know a lot of stuff. Not everybody has what I call the teaching gene. there's a certain gene that people have that they're born with. It's an ability to share information in an engaging way, and there's a passion for wanting to share information that these guys, all three of them have. I remember also Martin and Dave, just so everybody knows, they're my go-to guys for anything having to do with budgets. So and budgets and contracts. So they are so well suited to help you
I'm gonna
navigate.
hang this up now.
Yes, good, Eric. Do hang that up. So
Oh,
they
sorry.
so they really are well suited to help you at somewhat at more advanced levels of your production, because they know the dollars and cents. Blair and other producers like me and Blair and other people even in this room anecdotally know what things cost. Martin and David have to, because they're general managers. General managers have to know what things cost. So you'll get a lot of specifics and a lot of detail from them. What is the cost for both classes? I answered that for Natalie. You're not going to take both classes. You'll take one or the other for each class. Yes. And I answered that question for Kate. Okay, so Damaris, you say great question. Can you tell me what is the question so that we can? Oh, what makes it for a good? I'll bet it's what makes it for a good producer. So before I turn to the anecdotal discussion about producing and the business, does anybody in the room have any other questions about the program themselves? The subject matters that are covered in Foundations are very similar, they're parallel to the subject that are going to be covered in Masterclass. Again, in Foundations, you're going to be put on a team. This won't be about your project. Does it mean you can't talk about your project or ask questions about your project? Does it mean that, Blair?
No, people are very good at asking a question that feels like it's for everyone, but it's really for them. So
Yes.
you can talk about your project and ask questions as long as it's somewhat applicable to everyone's project, which it normally is. If you're asking questions that apply to what you're doing, we can absolutely cover it in Foundations.
And it's interesting that you say that, because one of the reasons why we decided to split Foundations from Masterclass was because we had classes where people were asking such specific questions just about their projects.
Yeah.
And it used to take a lot of time, a lot of class time. And we finally decided it's probably better to split the classes. People that need that sort of detailed information need to have their own class.
Which is why I think, Bob, keeping the number to 10 is another, because it will allow people to ask specific questions that are going to apply across all shows, but not always. So,
yeah. We had one enormously long discussion in one combined class many years ago that was all about producing in Chicago. So,
yeah,
you know, that's
Good
a
luck
little,
with that.
yeah, it's a little specific. Guys, is there anything else you want to share about the project or your
we should just
plans for
say that the master class are Monday nights, as opposed to Blair's class, which are Tuesdays, and ours are going to be from 6:30 to 9 p.m.
And I would say one of the things about, the master class, and, when we get to a lot of the same topics, budgets and the team you put together that we do in Foundations, that we'll tend to jump in, kind of assuming there's some knowledge and information with people so we can get deeper into some of these things. Because the important thing for a producer, I think for any producer, is you don't have to make your own budget. You have to be very involved in marketing and advertising, but it's not your job. There are people, and you'll meet some of them in Masterclass and in Foundations too, who do all these functions for you. But the trick is understanding what it is they prepare and put in front of you, to be able to really know what's going on, to know the questions to ask, to know the things you're not going to spend money on, and to understand how the whole team works together and how you can best lead your project as a producer without getting buried in the details that you'll be hiring a lot of other people to take care of for you. But if you don't understand what they're doing, you can't guide them.
I hate numbers. and I'm not even bad with them. I just don't want to deal with them. So I love being able to speak to the numbers once I've seen them, once they've been presented to me by a wonderful general manager, but I don't want to sit around making them. I don't want to do the math. I don't want to do any of that. So just having more knowledge and just a basis of knowledge will just make you a better producer, as we're talking about what makes a good producer. I did see one thing in the chat, Bob, if I can respond to that. It was a question about learning to effectively pitch people's own material. And I'll say, obviously, if you're in the master class, there will be a specific focus on your material. I don't know that that will be aimed precisely at pitching, but they'll be able to help you in having conversations about what your show and what makes it great. In foundations, though, I think sometimes people underestimate how valuable being knowledgeable is. My worst pitches are when I don't know what I'm talking about, and my best ones are when I already know what I'm talking about. It's not about studying or practicing, it's about having the knowledge base, because ultimately, and some of the other established producers here can speak to it, you'll get into a situation where you're doing a pitch and the person starts asking you questions, very specific questions about what's your option agreement look like, and what are the kickers for the investment, and what's the venue, what's the average ticket price. These are all the things that you'll want to understand, terms that you'll want to understand, things you'll want to be able to speak knowledgeably about. And so by learning the basics of all of this, making sure you understand all of the basics, it will make you a more effective pitcher. And by doing the final project and working with other people, not only will you be able to practice, but you'll be able to get information from me, the producer, the guest producers, and the other people in your group to help you learn how to be the most effective pitcher. And once you've done that, you can apply it to anything. So it's sort of up to you, but I think it can be really, really helpful.
Well, Scott's asking a question that came up, and you actually sent emails to a couple people. People last term sent you emails and said, I'm interested in producing my own show. What will I get out of foundations? Should I take foundations? And there were a couple people that decided not to, and there were a couple people that decided to, and I think we're very glad that they stayed. So can you explain that to Scott, why, even though he won't necessarily be able to talk specifically about his own show, he will get value out of taking your class?
I mean, I'm a person who loves knowledge. Actually, and maybe this will transition us to the next topic, which is, I don't think that there are a lot of hard skills you need to have as a producer. Like, you can respond to email, you can pretty much be a producer, you can write a check. But there are a lot of soft skills that you should have, I think, that make a producer great. And then there's also, just to be the most effective producer, you want to know as much as possible. You want to pay attention to what's going on in the news and in the industry. You want to pay attention to the market, and you want to understand as much as you can about your show and about your show's placement within the larger industry. And, we'll get into those details. I can't get into it now, but that's so important, and being able to lead your show to a successful production, reading, workshop, whatever it may be, having more knowledge cannot hurt. Now, if you're somebody who's like, I don't want to know, just do it for me, I can't help you. But I think that anyone here who is interested in producing a project should want to have as much information as possible to make sure that, like Martin said, you're not wasting money, you're not wasting time, you're not putting resources into the wrong place. You're understanding the best way to talk to investors and other producers, how to find the most effective general manager, how to look at a budget and say, oh, okay, I get a sense of what this is, this feels right. Understanding the legal contracts that you have in place, you don't have in place. And ultimately, you just don't know what you don't know. So if you feel like there's any area in which you're missing some information, I think it's important to have this foundation. I didn't know about the class when I first started producing, so I had to do a lot of on-the-job training over like 10 years, but I wish somebody had been able to take me through the basics so that I could say, great, I don't need to remember all this, I don't have to do all of this on every project, but I always understand it.
I was just to say about one of the things about producing at any level, whether it's a person doing a one-person show in a 99-seat theater, or a big off-Broadway show, or a Broadway show. And Dave and I went through this with so many producers when we were working together full time, who can start with a 29-hour reading, right, for industry. And the first question you have to ask is, Right, so what's your goal with this reading? Oh, it's, it's to raise $500,000. Who do you know who might invest? Because if you don't know anyone, it's really hard. You have to have a goal for every step of the project and know how you're going to achieve it. Because if you don't, I mean, we've worked with so many people who have spent $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a reading with no real goal, and they don't really listen to us when we say, maybe you shouldn't do this right now. And nothing comes out of it because they didn't have a goal and a real plan, and they hadn't networked out to get some key players to work with them. So it's very important at every stage. It's like when people take shows to Edinburgh. Right? This is our favorite example, where it costs a fortune to take your 2-character play to Edinburgh for 3 weeks. The odds of making any money are zero. All you will do is lose money. So we say to people, so why are you taking the show? What is the end game? Is it just to have 3 weeks of fun in Edinburgh? Great. But if it's to grow the show, what is the plan? How are you going to get to those people? Otherwise, it's probably the wrong time, and you should wait till you can really put a plan together that will achieve your goals. Because we as general managers and as producers, we don't want people to disappoint themselves and get discouraged about their project because they've maybe taken a decision too soon.
The broader overview for all of you guys, it's actually time for me to acknowledge the fact that although we started off as a producers organization, we began to realize that a lot of people become self-producers, and self-producing is probably a huge part of what goes on in the city, probably a larger part than what goes on in terms of the numbers of shows that are done. I think the self-producing probably is a couple hundred, and the Broadway show might be like 50 or 60 in a season. So the point here is that we understand that some of you who are self-producers, we call it self-producing artists spa. And I love the fact that it comes out as SPA, spa, because self-producing is so relaxing. But the thing is, we understand that you may not want to produce yourself. We understand that your goal is to find somebody else to produce you. We don't expect everybody that goes through our classes to become producers, professional producers. We don't expect that at all. But the broader overview for everybody that you need to realize is that, first of all, producers would rather work with people who understand the business. It's much easier for a producer to deal with people who understand what goes into the business. The more you understand about the business, the better, the more likely people are going to want to work with you. So, so from that point of view, understanding and learning from these guys, either class, gives you an advantage over a lot of other people. So don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate the importance of that. I got really tired of hearing writers and directors talk to me about how they got screwed by a producer. And on further exploration, we discovered that what happened was they didn't read their contract. They accepted terms that they didn't know they were accepting. And that doesn't mean that the producer was trying to fool them. The producer presented terms, and it's your job as an artist to say, I accept these terms, or no, I don't agree with this. Can we talk about something else? So about doing it a different way. So these guys are here to make you better at navigating the whole business. It's not just about producing.
I think that with the masterclass anyway, I mean, as Martin said, and as Blair said, I think the overview of the classes will probably be very similar. What you have with Martin and I, which I think made us good GMs when we GM'd and made us good producers when we produced, is that we've done both. And we've GM'd for producers, and we've hired GMs to work for us when we've been producing. Something that makes us, though, sort of different in the realm also is that both Martin and I have directed. Martin's directed a lot more than I have, but I've certainly done my fair share of directing, which means that we also understand what happens in the rehearsal room to an extent that really informs your ability to produce. You know, Bob said earlier, what makes a good producer? All of the things that we're going to go over are mostly about the business of, in fact, sort of exclusively are about, as a producer, you are the CEO of this corporation. one of the other sides of it is when you get more seasoned and you have the trust and you realize that you have a great sense of what you think also needs to happen in the room creatively, is you have the ability as the producer to give notes to creatives. And that's something that you either do well or learn how to do over time. But a great producer is able to give great notes that will have an effect on the show. You must understand all of the things that we're going to review in terms of how to get a show on. But once that show is on, it's your responsibility. Obviously, you have to make the right hires. I mean, you have to hire and then trust the people you're hiring are the right people in the room to do the creative work. But there are times that you're going to want changes, and you have to figure out a way to get those changes if you can, and do it in a way that will be receptively accepted by the creatives in the room. And that's not always easy. But it's a skill, and it's something that you learn over time. And Martin and I we gave the same note, I think, over and over and over on a show we did in the West End that never actually, I don't think we ever got in the show, but
No, they finally did. They finally one day said they figured it out, and they did the note after like maybe 18 weeks.
Yeah. So anyway, I just throwing that in there because there is, and that also comes from, as Blair was saying earlier, I mean, you really need to understand what it is that goes into your show. I mean, I always used to say that if you can memorize the first page, sort of all the summary stuff, you don't have to memorize a budget. Nobody's going to ever say to you how much you're going to be spending on props. But if you know how much certain phases of your show are going to cost, it means that when you're talking to somebody and you're pitching them the show, if you can talk extremely confidently about the numbers in a general sense and saying, this is what we're spending on advertising, this is what we're spending on marketing, this is how much our loading is going to cost, this is where our physical production costs are, this is that sort of thing. It just provides a potential investor a great sense of confidence that, okay, this person understands where the numbers are. That makes me feel more comfortable about writing them a check, because in the early phase, obviously, that's a very big part of your job as a producer. And then it's once you've got the money, it's how you keep that show going. And that's, as Martin said, you don't need to understand every phase of marketing, but you certainly have to have an opinion about how the show is being marketed. So anyway, I don't know exactly what my point is. I just bring this up to say that there's a lot of phases that we'll go through in the masterclass, which get into things that you need to be prepared to be in charge of and be prepared to weigh in on. Because ultimately, if your show has to close, you're going to be the one that has to make that decision. And you need to own up to it. Sadly, we've had to make those decisions before, Martin and I. So
I also, another thing that I think we left, a little detail that we left out, is that we all of us understand that there are different kinds of producing. There's commercial producing, there's self-producing, there's also not-for-profit. And these three guys know the not-for-profit world as well as they know the commercial world. Martin actually was an artistic director of the Alabama Shakespeare Festival Theater. What's the whole thing?
18 years. I founded it in 1972.
So if you're
I was
coming
11.
from you were 11. If you're coming from a not-for-profit background and you're thinking, I don't know if I can produce commercially, don't worry about it. These guys have your back. They know what the not-for-profit world is like too. And they know that some of the answers to some of the questions might be a little different for you than they are for somebody who's looking to do a developmental production of a new commercial show. So Gloria is asking how many weeks there are. It's not a question of weeks, it's what question of number of classes. Blair has committed to 10 classes. Dave and Martin
classes across 3 months.
And the same thing across 3 months.
I think ours is 9.
It's 9.
It's 9, and we're still working on our calendar. I mean, we'll start either on the 13th or 20th, depending upon the class coming together and everybody's schedules. The class is technically every other week, although there will probably be 2 times where the classes will be back to back consecutive weeks, trying to finish before we get very deep into June, if at all, because summa is a coming in.
And the other thing that I'm surprised nobody's asking this question is, if you miss a class, they're both being, now that we're virtual, the classes are recorded, so you can actually watch the class that you missed.
There may be
However,
punishment.
I was going to say, however, we do ask that you let your instructor know ahead of time if you need to miss a class. Don't just not show up. Let people know that you can't make it. That's very, very important. I mean, sort of, I don't know. It just matters. It really matters.
And I think it's probably the same with Blair. I won't speak for Blair, but classes are a finite length of time. But between classes, if you have questions that occur to you as you're absorbing the class and looking at stuff, you can always feel free to shoot off an email, and we'll get back to you with clarity.
And
or
that should be very exciting if, obviously, if you're in the master class and you have a project that's actually active and things come up that you need, you have a question about that'd be a fun question to answer. We're here to help.
Yeah, I make time, at least one 15-minute session, if not more, with everyone in the class, and half the people took me up on it. Some people don't. It's totally up to you. But I try to make questions for some individual attention, because maybe something in class didn't make sense and we didn't have time to get to it, but my inbox is open and I'm happy to do short meetings with people. One quick thing that I'll say, especially for the self-producing artists in the room, a lot of people are always asking, how do I find a producer? And I'm going to flip that on its head and tell you that you don't find a producer finds you. And a producer finds you because you are also a good producer. So if you had to put up a good reading, and you had to put together a good deck, and you had to have the right package of materials, and you had to be planning so that you had to make it easy for producers to find you. So don't feel like, yes, you'll be learning a lot of things you may never end up using, but that information will come in handy when, like Bob said, you're in conversations with producers or general managers. There are general managers whose bread and butter is people who don't know anything, who say, I want to do a reading, and they'll raise all the money and they'll pay the general manager, and the general manager will put them in a room in New York, and there'll be chairs and there will be a cast and a thing will happen. And that is not the same as doing it well. And we are in an industry that runs on dreams. So just know that there are always people who will take advantage of that. So the more knowledgeable you are, the more armor that you have as you enter as an artist, as a producer, you'll be able to find more success, or at least can be able to do this a little bit longer because you have that to work with.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who spent excessive amounts of money to have somebody, quote, produce their readings, and I think it's unnecessary. If you know more, you won't have to pay anybody that much money to do it, because you know enough. The other thing that I was,
Martin and I used to get, we took a lot of meetings with a lot of self-producing artists that were looking for general managers, and what they were really hiring us for, and we ultimately had to say, this isn't what we do. And I can't blame them, because what a lot of the self-producing artists that were not experienced just didn't have a Rolodex to fill a room for a staged reading. And if you're going to do a staged reading and put in all the time and go through the process of hiring and casting and getting a director and rehearsing, you obviously don't want to have an empty room to put on your show, because, as Blair said, a producer needs to find you. So what they would come to us and say, well, we expect you to invite everybody you know in the industry. And we had to say that's, if you're hiring us as general managers, that's not our job. And we lost, we certainly had people say, okay, well, we're not going to hire you then. And we were okay with that, only because it's hard. I mean, if you're looking, that's more of an executive producer function. And that's something that's a little bit different from general management. But it's hard, because if you don't know who to get in the room, then, and listen, under the best of circumstances, you could have a great cast and invite the cream of the crop. And sometimes people come and sometimes they don't, or sometimes you discover the day before your reading that there's a reading with Hugh Jackman that you didn't know about, and every producer in Broadway is going to go to that and not come to yours. And how could you know? But it is hard when you're a self-producing artist to get your new work in front of people. I'm not being discouraging. I'm just saying that's it can be difficult.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat about covering fundraising. I know in foundations, I have a whole class dedicated to fundraising, not only the phases of fundraising, but my tips. It's not something that anybody can be like, here's how you do it, and here's how you raise $1 million. But I can just advise in my own experience and the experience of other people I know, how we go about fundraising. And even if that's specifically where you feel like you are and the thing you need to know, I'll tell you that everything else will help you with fundraising, because part of fundraising is pitching. Part of pitching is knowing what you're talking about, and you'll get more people saying yes to giving you more money if you can convince them in that pitch, which means being really educated about the money you're spending, why you're spending it, and why it's necessary for your show.
And guys, I know a couple comments that came up about pitching in the chat. TRU covers pitching in the writer-producer speed date. I mean, it used to be just writers, but lately we've actually had producers and directors who have been pitching projects at our speed date. And Sharon, if you're here, and whoever I forget, Murray, you're going to actually see a couple of surprising pitches from people that are actually producers on Sunday. But pitching is as a whole, it's a whole other thing. It's a whole thing. I don't know, guys. Do you plan on giving any kind of tips on pitching during the course of your program?
Yeah, I mean, I think so,
Sure.
because it's you know, I mean, there's the elevator pitch, which is, you know, the 90-second version, the famous movie thing. You know, can you in 60 to 90 seconds sell your movie, which is a real thing in Hollywood, if you're new. But in theater, the same thing. You do a pitch to somebody. You know, you're sitting with some of the people in this room deal with Broadway a lot, and they get a lot of pitches. And, you know, there are things that you need to include in the pitch to try to pre-answer questions for people that they may have about, you know, why are you doing it? Who's the audience? You know, how do the numbers work? How long does it take to recoup? Who's in it? People want to know a lot of things. And one has to be prepared for potentially tough questions. I know Mary Davis asks tough questions. You know, you have to be ready for these, because, you know, these people are going to, on a Broadway show, put between $50,000 and $500,000 in your hands or more. For an off-Broadway show, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And they want to know where it's going, and that it's involved in a project that they like and believe in, and think maybe has a chance to actually be a success.
And this also
and only
applies.
you can-
This also applies to small productions, the things that you're doing on your own, like a reading that can cost $5,000 to $25,000, a showcase that you can do for $10,000 to maybe $50,000 or $60,000. I mean, and yes, somebody asked earlier, all of that is going to be covered in both classes. The levels of contracts is at least in one of the classes, probably the general manager class. That you're going to teach. There's going to be one thing about general manager and your relationship with general managers. Definitely you're going to hear about the different developmental steps. I think that's the second, maybe the second class or the third class, the developmental paths. Definitely, I know with Blair. I don't know whether Martin and Dave, are you planning on doing developmental paths?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I'd say about producing that's really crucial is, I mean, unless you have a show, right? The new Tom Stoppard play, or you've got Hugh Jackman or Sutton Foster or Mark Rylance, or one of about half
Or all
dozen.
three.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't more than that many people who can open a show on Broadway and guarantee you'll sell tickets, or anywhere. It's almost no one when you really sit down and talk about it.
Yeah.
They're not investing in your show. They're investing in you. And that's what the pitch is about, is yes, you have your show. Yes, you have all the reasons, but they're banking on you making this a success, because you're at the top of the pyramid and everything flows back to you. I always say, in one sense, anything a critic doesn't like when they see a show should be aimed at the producer. Don't bother a poor actor who's maybe not giving a good performance. The producer let it happen. They hired them and didn't fire them. The design's ugly, the producer approved it. Whatever is on stage or in the front of the house, the producer agreed to. And it's
Now
their job to get it right.
This is the deep dive that I was hoping for. This is basically, what does a producer do?
Yeah.
And Martin,
Everything.
Martin's, his overview at the beginning was, I think one of you, I think it was Martin, said, you're the CEO of your own company, basically.
Dave did, but yeah. I mean,
Dave-
it's Harry
Dave said it,
Truman. You know, it's Truman's desk. The buck stops here, and that's what a producer is.
You're driving the bus and you stop and pick people up and you keep the bus going. I mean, to discuss pitching very quick, I just think that Bob, we talk about the speed dates and we talk about that pitch. That is the pitch that gets your foot in the door. That pitch is crucial. I very quickly know whether I'm interested in what somebody's talking about and I want to talk more or I'm not. That's why that's important. What I'm going to do in foundations as far as pitching is teach you how to have the next conversation. So you need to get that first pitch in, and then you need to be able to go, once I said, fine, we'll have a 30-minute Zoom and talk about your show in detail for 30 minutes. That's not the same thing. So, and understand that the long conversation, that's going to be customized to each and every individual person. You have to understand them, and you have to understand what excites them, what intrigues them, and you need to be able to talk about it. So both of these are important. If you do the speed dates and you do that program, you will get that first initial pitch super important. And then through foundations or masterclass, you'll be able to talk about when we as producers talk about a pitch, we're talking about something bigger, something much longer, something that is long term. And yeah, that is why you need to be the CEO. You need to be driving the bus, because when you're in that conversation, I've had pitches that have gone on for 2 hours. And the person did not even put any money in. So, you know, you have to be able to talk about everything. And that is true whether you are the artist who's just doing something off Broadway or you are doing a big commercial show. It is going to stop with you. Your general managers will be a source of knowledge, but I would be nervous if I talked to somebody and they said, oh, I don't know, talk to my general manager. They may say, I need to figure that information out. That's great. But if they are not aware of it, if they're not keeping on top of it, then I don't really trust them with my money, you know?
And that's actually another point that should be made, that you should all hear, which is basically language, the words, vocabulary. You're gonna get a vocabulary from taking these classes that when you talk about things, you actually are talking a language that the people who know more than you actually understand. They'll actually listen to you because you're not confusing terms. So that's another thing. I mean, I think it was Patrick, it might have been you, Patrick Blake, who talked about we needed to have a lexicon. We needed to really give people the vocabulary to start them off, which is true. I mean, knowing how to talk about things is so important. Big question, what credit cards do you accept? We have PayPal. You can use any credit card you want. PayPal takes everything. And you don't have to use PayPal itself. You use PayPal as the means to actually use your credit card with us. I'm trying to think. Owen, have I missed anything else in there?
There's a question about what the deadline to apply is.
Well, that's a good question, because I just found out today that Blair wants to start on October 14th. We have to review applications. So Blair, how much time do you need to review applications before the 14th?
I don't need much time. And also I'll say this, that and you can, make this public, Bob, the first class is most likely going to be something that you could watch a video of. It's just going to be an introduction. We're going to, people are going to introduce themselves, what they're working on. I'm going to do an introduction of myself. I'm going to talk about the topics we're going to cover. I'm going to get questions from people if there's specific things that they want me to cover. So I'm happy to accept applications up until that time. And even if it goes past that intro period, if you know somebody who you think this would be valuable for, please send them our way. We'll make sure that they're done. Yeah, I'll make it happen.
But if you know that you want to do the class and you want to submit, I would ask you to do it in the next week.
Yes.
Give us next weekend to review, and
Yes.
then give you official acceptance. Okay. And if you need more time, email me and say I need more time. But try for next Friday as being a deadline. I think would make my life doable.
I agree.
Any other questions, guys? I want to actually go back to the question of what makes a good producer. I want to ask you, Dave, what are your thoughts about what makes a good producer? What should people think about if they And producer doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving up your job as a writer. It just means that you're taking control of a situation. I was a writer who became a self-producer because I was tired of not getting produced. So I realized that, oh, I can do this. If you have some business knowledge and have some business sense, and you fill in the blanks with what these guys can help teach you, then you can be the CEO of that small, medium, or large corporation called your show. So Dave, I was giving you a little time to think about it.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said earlier, I mean, the makes a good producer. Ultimately, I think you have to believe in your product. That's the first thing. You really have to find the show that, if you're going to be a lead producer. I mean, listen, there's a lot of there's obviously different. I guess we're talking about being a lead producer, right? You're being in charge. That's what you're asking.
Yeah, let's think about it as being a lead producer.
Right. So this is a show that you have decided is worthy and is needs to be seen. There's something about it that I mean, listen, my experience is mostly as a commercial producer. I did spend the last year as the artistic director of a not-for-profit, the Cape Playhouse. So we did 7 shows. That was sort of a different thing that I produced 7 shows for them there. But what I'm talking about now is really more what I'm thinking about this now is more commercial. So I have a product that I believe needs to be done and can make money. So if we're not, I'm just not in the not-for-profit, but and therefore I'm able to, I need to convince other people to, because I can't bankroll it myself. I need to convince other people that this is something that you should invest in. And therefore I have a responsibility to my investors. I have a responsibility to the creatives that I've hired that I'm going to take the money that has been budgeted and I'm going to spend it properly in order to give that show the very best chance it has to succeed. And there's so much that goes into all the decisions that are from everything from casting to hiring the right creative team to being in the right theater. It's very rarely a choice. It's not like you go and meet with the Schuberts and Jujemsen and PDG and they say, oh, well, we can offer you several of them. I've said that Martin has heard me say this a million times, but I've often said as a producer, you have 3 sales you have to make. You have to, first you have to sell your show to the investors, and being able to do that, you have to be very good. And you have to, as we're saying, all the knowledge that hopefully you will learn either in foundations or in the master class will allow you to be better at selling that product. But the second sale is you have to sell your show, at least for a Broadway show, to the theater owners. And that's often the hardest sale of all. It's oftentimes even harder than selling your show to the public. So again, you have to convince the Broadway people that your show is worthy enough, unless you've got a huge star. It's not always easy. Martin and I have been in a lot of meetings with the Broadway theater owners, and sometimes it's like, okay, we'll let you know. And you know, unless you've got a big name, it's sometimes very hard to get a theater. But you have to know the right people, and you have to know the timing, and you've got to know, I mean, there's so many things, and we're going to get into all of this about all of the intangibles, and every show is individual and every show is different. There's no cookie cutter formula. So I think it's a little bit about knowing where your niche is, where you can fit in the right season. Is it the right time to do the show? I mean, Bob, it's such a big question.
I know it is.
I mean, the other thing I might say about that is that it's a people business. It's one of the few people businesses left.
100%.
You have to be comfortable talking to strangers who are wealthier and more successful and more experienced than you are, and convince them to believe in you. Because it gets down to one-on-one relationships with investors, with theater owners, your relationship with your whole team, the lawyers and the general managers and the marketing people. These are all personal relationships. It's really important. And you know, one of the great general managers in our business forever, Albert Poland, who's retired now. Albert's a great guy.
That was the first GM I ever met.
Yeah, Dave and I had a meeting with Albert about some project. We can't remember what it was even. We thought we were doing a project producing and needed a general manager, and somebody suggested we meet with Albert. And he didn't take the project, and the project never happened. But he said, here is the best advice I can give you about producing. He said, you need to know when to walk away. Whether it's from a show that's never going to get produced, a show that's in development and is never going to get good enough. You can't spend your whole life trying to wrestle one project into shape, because there's really almost no history besides Music Man of that ever being successful. You need to be serious with yourself. We've done a lot of shows that have succeeded. We've done shows that have failed. We did a show off-Broadway last year, a little musical called Islander from Scotland. Got good notices and stuff, but we got ignored by the Times. We lost a big chunk of money. And now we did it in the round, where it's always been done. And we took the decision, we're remounting the show in England at Theatre Royal Plymouth as a proscenium production designed by Emma Bailey, who designed Six. And we're going to be touring the US with the proscenium version of the same show, which if it tours for about 30 weeks over 2 years, will earn back all the money we lost. So it's also, just because an original production loses its money, doesn't mean that you've lost that money, that there aren't other ways. And we all learned that from one show. We learned that from Seussical many years ago. Because when Seussical opened on Broadway, there was no history of family entertainment on Broadway. You took your kid to see My Fair Lady. You didn't take it to a Disney show. And Seussical came to Broadway, and it was like, no, we're not spending Broadway prices for a kiddie show. And it became a hugely successful show on the road, at regional theaters, at community theaters. And it wasn't that many years before they actually recovered all their money and went into profit. There were just so many other ways. But again, as a producer, right now, let's look at my little chart. I'm working on 11 shows right now. And some will be good, some won't, some will make it, some won't make it. But they're always being juggled. And some of them you may work on for 7, 8, 10, 12 years, from production to, gee, can we tour it? Can it go to Europe? Can it go to Asia? The shows keep going once they open. You can find a lot of things, but it takes diligence and a great team around you, and your belief that there is an audience for this show.
You also have to know when changes need to be made, and things that you believed in so strongly may evolve over time. I mean, the reason you do a reading of a show is you can hear it read out loud in front of an audience, and then suddenly you realize this bit doesn't work. You put it into production, you go into rehearsal, and you realize, oh God, that scene doesn't work, and scenes get rewritten and scenes get thrown out. And I would recommend to everybody on this call, you must read Act 1 by Moss Hart, just to learn about the crazy stuff that happens in the life of certain shows. Where back, this is a long time ago when shows were a lot less expensive, but when you read about entire scenes being cut from shows and set pieces being thrown out in the alley in New Haven, and actors being given new pages and going on stage that night, which would never happen today. But just that, I worked on a show years ago when I was an assistant director for a show that was called Queen the Musical, which was a bio musical about the band Queen. That was just a proper bio musical, sort of like Jersey Boys, which turned into We Will Rock You, which ultimately was set in 2323, where, in a galaxy far, far away, which couldn't have been further from the original idea that Craig Lucas wrote the book for, and then ultimately didn't do the show. So things evolve, ideas change. And as a producer, you need to either say, this is a great idea, we're changing it for the right reason, or I don't want to see that change. But as Martin said, there's a long tail to this business sometimes. And we'll get into those ways of being able to stretch that out into touring opportunities, licensing, and other ways to make your show potentially make money once you've closed the first time.
And just speaking to something, sorry, really quickly, what David just said was, I think the biggest difference between, not-for-profit theater and commercial theater as a producer is if you work in a not-for-profit theater, you're doing a show within a theater company. I've run several of them. There is a doctrine of the shows have to be good enough, but you rarely make the tough decisions because you're doing the show at this regional theater or whatever. You've got a budget, you've got a board. You don't want to rock the boat. So it's good enough. The audience will like it. You're not going to fire those 3 actors or fire the book writer or fire the director in the middle of it.
No, you've got a finite run anyway.
You almost never do that.
Yeah.
But in commercial theater, there is no option other than getting it right. You can't have friends in the show that are untouchable. I'm developing a new musical, which I'm directing and also executive producer on. And we just are changing the book writer lyricist. After the first phase of developing the show. And it was a close personal friend of mine.
Ouch.
But it's gonna be a $25 million show. You can't have friends in that way. It's about, is this going to work? If it's not going to work, you have to always move on. And that's the hard part. We have a dear friend who's working on 2 big Broadway shows. He's never been a lead producer. And he's decided he hates it when he realized he has to make those decisions all the time. And some creative he's worked on with 4 years on the show, and he realized they're never going to do a good enough job with their piece of the show. You have to move on because there's too much at stake.
So Blair, do you have anything that you wanted to add to the conversation about what makes a good producer? Because then I'm going to take some of the questions out of from the chat. And I'm going to
like I said, it's not
Season as well. Absolutely.
there's nothing. It's not like there's a specific set of skills. There's no degree in producer. There might be now. There might be some degrees in producing, but for most people, there was no degree in producing. You take a course like this, but you have to have that big heart, and you have to have your ears open, and you have to be listening, and you have to have an active mind, and you really, really have to have a strong will. Just to reiterate it, the biggest lessons you'll learn in producing is through failure. You don't actually learn anything when you succeed, which is really, really annoying, because when you succeed, well, you could chalk it up to one of those many, many things that you did. And then when you fail, it's because of all the things you didn't do. So you learn, and that's it. That's what's so annoying about producing. Every single time a show succeeds or fails, you're sitting there in the dark, like, what made it work? But you learn and you gain experience, you gain perspective, which allows you to make those tough choices like Martin was talking about. And I really think it's important to be an audience member, like a producer. I like to think of a producer and certain producers as ultimately just an audience advocate, somebody who is in there knowing what will the audience like, hopefully what will people like critically, what will sell tickets. And that's true whether you're nonprofit or commercial. You need to get people in the door to see it. So I think it's all about being able to weather the storm. It is a long road. And also, it's not about one thing. And I think that's true as a writer. And I want to say that, like, if you're a writer and you only have one show, it can be really challenging if that thing doesn't take off. But that's okay if that's your project and that's what you want to pursue. But you have to know when to say, maybe this isn't the thing, or maybe this isn't the time. Luckily, like with Susical or other things, you can always come back to something. But if you want to do this long term, you have to really have that perspective to say, okay, this isn't the right time, this isn't the right team, this isn't the right place, something went wrong. Do we put it to the side for now, or do we come back? What changes do we make? Because ultimately you do have people that you answer to in the form of investors, and they're going to ask, well, why did you let this happen? And your answer can't be, well, because it was a friend, or because, we just always done it that way. So make sure you have that strong will, make sure your mind is always active and thinking, and listen and learn. That's it.
Because I know that you guys are going to have to leave soon. I want to address some of the things that are in the chat. Sue Bachner is correct. We do have some criteria that we're looking for when we decide who goes into masterclass. One thing that Sue doesn't mention in her posting is we also look at your resume, not your theater resume necessarily, your business resume. Sometimes people interest us for masterclass because they have business skills and business background that we think is promising, that we think could be applied to theater, and they could make them a good producer. But mostly we are hoping, or I think we require that you have a project that you're working on. And Amy asks, do I consider a PDMP an alternative to CTI or complementary to CTI? First of all, CTI is not happening right now. CTI folded supposedly temporarily a couple months ago. I used to give scholarships to CTI, and then we started doing programs like this, and my board and I came to the conclusion that what we offer is as valuable as CTI. We offer it in a different way than CTI does it. So I know people that have come to us from CTI, and I know people that have taken PDNP and have also taken CTI. Anywhere that you can get knowledge is going to be valuable for you. Complementary or alternative, I don't know. It's
Yes, I'd say they're both. It's the same. Yeah, I mean, they're,
CTI is probably a little bit, well, it doesn't exist, so it doesn't matter. But if you did like the 3-day sort of program, it's very like heavy on information, and it's not like a personal kind of thing in any way. There wasn't a ton of personal instruction. If you did the long program, which I was not accepted to, but you know, whatever, where there's other people who were accepted, then you might get a little bit more personal instruction. So
yeah, the people that have done people who
It's
have done
100%
both.
about Broadway also.
Yeah, and CTI really is in its heart. It's really focused on. It was originally started by Fred Vogel, who started it, was a friend of mine, and it was really a way for him to create an atmosphere where he could actually find people that were potential investors more than producers. So CTI has always sort of functioned on a slightly higher commercial level than we necessarily do. We're very open commercial, not for profit, self-producing artists. CTI eventually evolved, and I think that they have self-producing artists who come in there, who come in as well. And I've been told by people that took both that we're a friendlier organization.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's basically the big difference that I know of. Natalie wants to know, how much did COVID skew your calculations in terms of being general managers? What did COVID do to you guys, and are you out of it yet?
I mean, I general managed one of the first shows to come out of COVID, a play that Richard Nelson wrote, The Michaels Abroad, that we did at the theater at Hunter College rather than the public. And it's it adds considerable money during the real COVID times. I also directed 2 shows during bad COVID times. You have a COVID officer, you've got testing, you have more understudies. I know the biggest thing on Broadway, I mean, and we'll talk about the masterclass, the actual real costs of doing a Broadway show have gone up 40% since 2019, 40%.
Wow.
I've stared at budgets, I've looked at things. You know, when we did Islander, we had a huge LED lighting rig for $2,100 a week. I talked to the same vendor about a show taking place 16 months later, and the quote was $3,700. This is what's happening. And also we're seeing in budgets for shows, often on Broadway, much bigger reserves to cover bad weeks. Shows are having many more understudies because people are used to having, you know, 2, 3, 4 people out at the same time. So I think the effects of COVID financially have been very difficult. And not to mention audiences not really coming back to a lot of venues yet, but it has added quite a bit. I mean, one Broadway show we just looked at the budget of, a Broadway reserve fund, the extra money you raise above actual costs to cover problems in previews, used to be $1.25 million. I just looked at a budget for a new Broadway show opening this year. Their reserve is $5 million. They've raised $5 million more than they need because they're terrified about things that can happen.
So 10 years ago, you could do a musical on Broadway for $5 million. It would be a small musical, but you could do it. Now that's the reserve for a musical. I spoke to a producer a few months ago that said that she had gone down the road. She's an investor. She had gone down the road with a producer that was really wanted her to come on board for, I think, $500,000. And she just kept trying to talk about the total capitalization, and they were finally coming to, they hadn't come up with the final figure yet. And she said, when he said that they decided they would take the budget down from 25 million to 23 million, She was like, you're out of your mind. And she is not investing because, I mean, I haven't looked at a recoupment chart. I mean, Martin, you just said you were talking about a $25 million musical, but I would love to see the recoupment chart in terms of when that show is going to potentially pay its money back on a realistic timetable. And that's just, so that's the other thing, folks, is that the reality of the world of commercial theater is very different. As imagine the, even small off-Broadway is going to be expensive. I mean, we're in a world now where live entertainment is very, very expensive to do.
Extremely expensive. And I haven't even looked at Broadway recently just because of that, because of the massive risks.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
There are many other ways to produce, though, and we will talk.
But listen,
about
but the thing is that they, but they're, I mean, listen, the other side of it is, Bob, is that there's great shows. There are great people still producing great work. There's so much worth seeing. There's so much worth doing. So
well,
it's an industry that is still viable. It's just very expensive.
Just to balance that, we also need to acknowledge that even during COVID, Music Man broke all box office records. They were doing $4 million weeks. It's also Hugh Jackman and it's Sutton Foster, but there were audiences there. They were filling the house. Lion King was selling out. A lot of shows were selling out. What's hard is getting new products out there and finding support for the new products. So the kind of interesting idea to try to explore is, how do you take these audiences that have been filling these theaters and convince them that they might want to support shows that don't have Hugh Jackman in it? And that's a real question, and that's something that I think somebody should really do a study about and should look into. How do we, if we fill houses at Music Man every performance for like 6 months, that's a lot of people who have discovered theater. I know my nieces went to see Music Man. They'd never seen a Broadway show before, and one of them came up to me at intermission and said, "This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life." She was so thrilled. So she was a potential theater goer who was brought into the fold. I know that it really keeps coming back to, well, you got to get Hugh Jackman into it, but there's got to be some way of getting those people who fell in love with theater to fall in love with other pieces of theater that aren't necessarily the blockbusters.
Theater has always been a big risk for audiences, right? I always laugh because I say, we literally show people a poster and we're like, give us $150, please. Like, that's nothing. So we have to, it is business, and we have to start treating it like the way other businesses treat their products. If you're talking about, you can charge $200 ticket, you can charge $500 a ticket, Michael. The point is that people pay for things that they care about. And too often we're putting things up that people don't care about and they don't know about. When you buy an iPhone, you're actually not just buying a phone. You could, if that was what you're doing, you'd buy any phone. You're buying more than a phone. You're buying to be a part of a brand. You're buying a lifestyle. You're buying an experience. You're buying an idea. We have to treat the shows that we're doing as not just something that goes on the stage and plays to 1,200 people a night. It has to be something that speaks to a massive audience the way Hugh Jackman is. Our show, your title, whatever, you yourself need to be the Hugh Jackman. And when I talk about Jane Dubin, who taught the last masterclass, we talk a lot about creating our own IP, because that's all people complain about pre-existing IP. Okay, well, make your own. And whether that's through music or whether that's through other ways of storytelling, whether that's through what you're doing on social media, there's ways to get audiences excited to ultimately come see your show on stage. So if we start thinking of our shows in that way and not just, if we're going to raise $20 million, we might as well put some of that money into some other exciting ways to leverage the content that we have and the stories that we're telling and the people who are involved. So.
Yeah, I think part of that, Blair, is when Dave and I were doing a show in London, we were trying to get a theater, and we had a note from Cameron McIntosh explaining why he wasn't going to give us a theater. And of course, 6 months later, he did. But what he did say was that the thing missing from our show was we didn't have an irresistible element. And that's a phrase that stuck. That could be Hugh Jackman. It could be like Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. The whole production, the physical production was the star. The Lehman trilogy, the combination of the play and the event of this 3.5-hour play, and the story was the event, because we didn't know who those actors were really in America. But when you look at any show that becomes a hit on or off Broadway, even in a 90-seat theater, there's something irresistible about it. Not just good, not just quality, but actually irresistible. And I think that's, you know, Six has it, Hadestown has it, a lot of shows have that. A lot of shows don't. Almost Famous didn't. Some Like It Hot doesn't. There's just nothing that's irresistible. And that's the trick. So what is it about your show that people are not going to be able to not go to? You know, and that's the trick.
Well, and Susan, I see your point about $200 a ticket, but I will respond to that by saying almost everything in our lives that we have now was at one point too expensive for us to engage with. I'm talking on a laptop that I would not have been able to afford, you know, even 30 years ago, nobody would have been able to afford a computer initially. So there is a point where the shows that you're doing or what you're making is going to be at a certain level. But again, we're not talking about one show or one production. We're talking about a product that has a life beyond Broadway. Broadway for so many shows is just a branding exercise. It's just a way for them to say when they put it out on tour, it's direct from Broadway, and for the licensors to be able to say, oh, cool, I can license this show. And suddenly you now have it in your community and you're paying $15 a ticket or $20 a ticket. So yeah, you may not get to see that production. You may have to pay $500 to see, you know, whatever it is right now. But these shows are more than that. They're more than Broadway. They're more than that one moment. So if we think about it that way, if we think about Suzuko, if we think about it, then we don't have to be so afraid of the risks that we're taking if it has that irresistible element that Mine's talking about.
Not easy to deliver those goods.
No?
I know that Martin has a concert he's going to, so
Yeah.
I reluctantly am going to let my panelists go and say goodnight to everybody. Guys, if you have any other questions about PDMP, just email me at trunltd@aol.com. I should be typing that into the chat. Let me find. Okay, just email me. Blair, Martin, and Dave, do you want people to contact you if they have questions for you personally, or do you want? Is it okay? So
And can I just shill for a show I have no involvement with that I just saw? I'll just do this anyway. But because there's a lot of discount tickets available now, they may not be around for long. But there's a show at Park Avenue Armory, my favorite venue in New York, from the National Theater called Love, which takes place in
Catherine,
housing for people who don't have homes at the moment in England. It's the most extraordinary, funny, moving show I've seen in so long. It's a one-off. It's its own thing, not like anything else you've seen. And it's really worth 100 minutes of your time if you can manage to get there. It's pretty extraordinary.
I think it's reviewed today at the Times.
Yeah.
I just read a review of it. Guys, I'm not going to go into speaker review and do my official thank you to everybody and to the YouTube viewers. I'm just going to say that thank you guys for doing this. Thank you for being part of TRU, and thank you for offering your time and your knowledge going forward for people to take the classes. Anybody out there who's watching this and doesn't know us, you can email me at trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com, and you can ask me questions and I can tell you more about the programs. And that's it for today. Thank you for being with us, everybody.